All right, so it's kind of a hazy day on the coast here. I've actually been driving around as usual looking for a place that's protected from the wind. I was hoping to find some sun, but unfortunately I wasn't able to. So I'm just gonna make the most of this scene here. Let me show you what I'm thinking. I wanna have some rocks in the foreground and then this distant bit of rocks out here. And there are some nice waves that are kind of rolling through here. And then as the water pulls out, there's a bit of reflection on the wet sand. Some nice colors in here as well. I'm not sure if I'll include the sky. Clouds are not that interesting, but we'll see. As usual, I'm just gonna play around and see what happens. All right, so I've got my Anderson easel perched among the rocks here. My usual palette of colors. I do have a guest color today. This is Viridian, and I'm using Liquin Original as my medium. And I'm painting on a 14 by 18 inch panel. All right, so I'm toning with burnt sienna today, thinning with odorless mineral spirits. And I just kind of mop it onto the panel. You don't need to cover the whole panel. Just get enough on there that you can spread around with a paper towel. A bit more mineral spirits. I always try to leave a little bit of the tone coming through in the final painting. I just think it adds a nice bit of warmth to an otherwise cool looking scene. Kind of nice to have the bits of orange coming through in the rocks especially. I prefer to keep the tone kind of light in value. So there we go. Sketching in burnt sienna as well. And I'm just starting with some big shapes here. Getting a sort of compositional idea. I like having some rocks in the foreground. I guess I got to decide how far I want these rocks to come out. They're right here. Maybe I'll have it something like that. And then horizon up like this. You know, there's not that much going on in the sky. Actually, maybe I'll put the horizon a little bit lower. And then the waves are kind of coming in like in this direction, like a kind of a radial fashion. A little bit of white water in here. I think I want that horizon a little higher because the rocks are kind of below the horizon. There's a bigger one here. And then one that kind of goes up over like that, goes up over the horizon. Okay, there's a rock out here. You can see, I don't know if you can see, it's right there. I'm going to include that too. Actually, maybe I'll put it out here. Something like that. When I first started painting, I never would put rocks in the foreground. For some reason, I just thought it would feel too heavy at the bottom of the composition. But now I actually really like doing that. So overall, I think that looks like a pretty fun composition to start out with. I just start with general shapes and then I can get more specific. So I like the idea of this rock here, kind of swooping down and then peaking a little bit over here. Again, the radial waves coming in, starting, you know, horizontal at the horizon and then sort of curving like this. It's nice to get some diagonal energy into the painting. And then, you know, the distant rocks or cliffs out here. So there's another look at the scene. Actually, it looks like some sun is coming out. So I'm sort of indicating where some of the whitewater will be. I'm thinking a breaking wave right by this rock, and then some whitewater in here, another maybe broken wave right there, and one out here. Also indicating some motion here. There's, you know, when the water washes back into the ocean after the wave is broken, sort of on a slight angle. All right, so I'm mixing up a dark using ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, a touch of yellow ochre, and I've got also a little bit of alizarin crimson in there. And I'm just gonna squint at the scene and look for, you know, dark patterns using a pretty big brush here. Trying to work quickly. Keeping the paint transparent or relatively transparent at this point. I may come back in and put some more opaque paint to kind of reinforce the darks. And I'll also be adjusting colors. I mean, I can kind of adjust as I go along. I'm seeing a little bit more blue in these rocks, so I'm going to add a bit of ultramarine and a touch of titanium white. And these colors are just approximations at this point. There's also a bit of orange in them, so I'm using burnt sienna and yellow ochre. I'll add that to the mix. And this number 8 natural bristle is really flexible. It's also nice because it holds a lot of paint, so it's easy to cover the panel fairly quickly. All right, these rocks in here are a little bit grayer. Adding some more titanium white because they're actually lighter in value as well. A little bit. A lot of times when I'm painting rocks, I'll just work really quickly and, you know, do my best to duplicate what I'm seeing. But I'm more or less just using it as inspiration. Then I'll step back and I'll just kind of look for patterns in the spontaneity and then just reinforce those patterns. A little more blue to the mix here and a little more titanium white for the rocks in the distance. And I've been adding liquid, just a touch of liquid to all of these mixes. Liquid allows me to apply the paint really quickly. All right, mixing up color for the water, and I'm using ultramarine blue, titanium white, and a bit of burnt sienna, which will push it towards green. The color of the water is actually made up of 2 different colors. There's the color of the water itself, which is the green color, and then along the surface there is the reflected sky, which is more of sort of an ultramarine blue. And the value of those 2 colors is kind of close together. Very, very narrow value range. You know, after this is laid in, then I come on top with the sky color. And I feel like I want that to be even greener. So I'm adding some cad yellow medium. All right, that's better. I'm starting with a mid-value for this water, like mid-value blue-green. But I can change that and probably will. I may end up lightening it up a little bit. When I do come over with the reflected sky, the value of that is lighter, so it will definitely lighten it up a bit. And there's some breaking waves kind of on these rocks. It's good to keep the whitewater patterns somewhat irregular, and also the pattern of the rocks as well irregular. I mean, that pretty much goes for painting anything, anything, you know, in the natural world. A little bit of whitewater here, a broken wave, then also another one here. And I'm going to be adding some darks in here as well. I know I've mentioned this before, but painting, you know, seascapes it's more or less painting an abstract painting. There's so much freedom. And here is going to be kind of the wet sand. At this point, I just want a nice, you know, pattern of dark water. All right, mixing up a color for the sky using titanium white, ultramarine blue, and a touch of phthalo blue. And the value of the sky looks a little bit dark. That's okay. It's easy to come on top with like some additional titanium white to lighten it up. Here come some pelicans. Next, I'm mixing a color for the rock reflections, and this is burnt sienna in yellow ochre. Whenever I paint reflections, I start with vertical strokes, and then I come across with, you know, I'll come across with horizontal bits of water. But for now, I'm just going to do the vertical strokes. All right. And then there's some reflected sky in the wet sand right here. So I'm going to use a little bit of ultramarine. And that may be a bit too blue. Adding in a little bit of yellow ochre. All right, and for the whitewater, I'm using titanium white with a touch of ultramarine blue. And I want to keep the initial strokes here pretty spontaneous. You know, because there's a lot of energy in the water, and I want to kind of capture that. And the one nice thing about using a loaded brush is you can sort of mimic the motion of the water, you know, if you keep your paint fluid enough. So I'm thinning it a bit with liquid and a touch of mineral spirits. I'll probably be reinforcing these lights because I really want them to stand out. All right, so here's what I finished up with. Pardon the shadow along the top here. The only touch-ups I feel like I do on this is possibly lighten the value of these distant rocks. In real life, they were pretty dark actually. I did lighten, you know, this area here. This is darker, but I think that I might lighten those a bit to push them off further in the distance because the values are very similar to the rocks in the foreground. I like the idea of adding rocks in the foreground. I do feel like it does create a feeling of depth in the painting. And one other thing I'll say is that when I'm painting waves now, I'm very conscious of trying to get the scale of the waves to be correct. I mean, these were decent sized waves, and yet compared to the rocks, they're fairly small, you know, regarding the scale, like wave compared to the rocks. And that was something that I really paid attention to as the waves rolled through. You know, I was like, all right, what is the relationship between this rock and those waves? You know, like what's the scale relationship? Because for a long time, I just would exaggerate the size of them. And I look back on those paintings and it just doesn't look realistic. I do like the sky here. I was thinking of just painting it sort of a simple blue color, but there were a few clouds, you know, occasionally drifting by, and I thought, all right, I'm going to just add those and see how I feel about it. I really think it adds quite a bit. So I'm glad that I, you know, added some interest up there. I'm going to do that more often. And the last thing I'd say is that this is always really challenging to kind of capture the wet sand. I think that worked out, and then also where the water passes over the wet sand. One last thing, always got to be sure to look for the sky reflections on the surface of the water. All right, so hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you'd like to see some extra videos and help support the channel, there's a Patreon link down below. Got a bunch of extra videos on my Patreon. Also a materials list, so if that sounds interesting, like I said, link below, check it out. Other than that, stay creative, and I'll see you guys in the next video.